The fourth step in the U.S. Secret Service Operational Guide is determine the threshold for law enforcement intervention. Welcome back. I'm Holly Hollingsworth.
And I'm Kyle Anderson. In this step, we'll discuss the role of law enforcement on your threat assessment team. Which threat assessments must they be involved in? And what about transient threats that don't seem to require law enforcement?
Let's talk first about the types of tips or reports that come in through your reporting mechanism or other sources, the ones that always require law enforcement intervention. These would include threats of physical violence and planned school attacks. Reports of this type are very serious, but are also generally less common.
Research shows that a vast majority of anonymous tips received by threat assessment teams are instead about topics such as these: thoughts of suicide, bullying, drugs, cutting behaviors, or depression. Some of these reports don't require law enforcement intervention, but the law enforcement member of your threat assessment team should still be involved in the team's work when reports such as these come in.
Several of our experts point out that law enforcement should be involved in the team's work, whether or not law enforcement action needs to be taken. In a moment, we'll learn why from Sergeant SUZANNE MURACO of the Hilliard Division of Police in suburban Columbus. But first, similar viewpoints as we hear once again from Stark County Sheriff Meyer and Kent State University Police Chief Tundiglia.
We have a law enforcement representative on the team at all times. And I think it's really important that they're there again to be involved in that assessment, because even though it may not be a crime or true law enforcement intervention needs to be taken where there's some law enforcement action taken, I think their insight in helping to assess the situation and lend their expertise to the other team members that may be dealing with it. Maybe it is something that ends up in a conduct court or a psychological services referral or some other kind of referral. I think it's invaluable to have the law enforcement perspective, although there may not be a crime. So I think that that threshold for their involvement in the team initially is zero. I think they need to be there. I think that there needs to be a law enforcement presence in these teams. Now, whether or not law enforcement action is taken, that's a whole other story. Certainly, if we ever get to a situation where we perceive that there is an imminent threat of violence of some kind, we're taking action, and we'll handle it through law enforcement means. But prior to that, if there's other steps that can be taken where we know they can be taken safely and still addressing the problem without actually taking law enforcement action, we'll do that as well. So we really kind of gauge each one. But if you're not in the room present at the time of the discussion, the law enforcement officer doesn't know that. So if they're not there during a discussion where the other disciplines may not be intimately aware of what's legal or illegal and what really rises to the level of concern for law enforcement, then it's never brought to law enforcement's attention. So I think that's why it's important to have that law enforcement officer in the room at that time so that they can evaluate that during those discussions and then make that decision of whether or not they need to take further action or just be involved in the conversation.
In Stark County, we have 17 school districts. Our Education Service Center services 22 different school districts. We are engaged in school safety each and every day. It's not only our responsibility, it's our duty to make sure that our schools are safe. We have adopted the principle of prevention through many training and seminars with Mr. Dewey Cornell, and we feel that in Stark County we are forward-leaning and that we are looking at a different approach to school safety than we have in the past. We always have trained and prepared to respond to a violent situation, whether it be a school or anywhere. We've always done a good job of training and preparing. Our challenge has been how do we prevent things? And so when we are making the focus now on prevention, I think that is definitely the right way to go, because obviously we don't want to respond to a crisis. We want to prevent a crisis. Our responsibility in law enforcement is to deter, detect, and defend our schools. Obviously we want to create a safe environment in our schools each and every day, not only for the faculty and the work there, but more importantly for the students that go there every day and want to say and deserve and are entitled to a safe environment. Certainly that is one of our primary responsibilities, but how we do that and how we accomplish that is really the challenge. one of the ways that we've always done that in a certain direction. And one of the things that we've done through that in establishing the prevention model is we're looking beyond just the classroom now. I mean, I think we're utilizing that team. We're utilizing the professionals that are there, the mental health professionals, the school workers, the school faculty to help us identify what our role is. I know there's a concern that with the law enforcement in the schools that we arrest our way out of problems. And very rarely do we arrest students. In the cases that we do, they're usually a diversion type of program that's put in place. We're not looking to get people into the criminal justice system. We're looking to keep them out of the criminal justice system.
My name is Sergeant Suzanne MURACO. I'm currently the Criminal Investigations Unit Detective Sergeant, and I'm also a member of our School Safety Task team as well. This year, at the end of the school year, there was a student who committed a crime of violence at school and was suspended. It was assaulting another student and was suspended. Then summer came. We dealt with that student twice more, one for an alcohol violation and one for another curfew violation. At the very beginning of the next school year, different school teachers, different school administration, that student had another outside of school crime of violence. It was a party on a Friday night. And because those come through our detective bureau, we caught on and said, well, okay, this is 6 months straight of dealing with this individual, but over 2 different school grades, if you will. So we decided to reach out to the school resource officer, who we have great communication with, and that school resource officer said, yeah, we've been noticing failing grades, nothing to create a suspension. They thought the student was doing well. So when we came to the table again, we once again realized that he has severe anger management issues. I don't know how best to put that. It was a single parent atmosphere where the mom was trying her hardest to not only pay the bills and keep, shelter over the head, but trying to figure out how to help with her son. So we came together as a community with resources that second time rather than charges.
It's essential for the threat assessment team to know that law enforcement is there in a supporting role. As we discussed in Step 1, the school superintendent or someone designated by the superintendent leads the threat assessment team. But the school and local law enforcement must have a good working relationship. This helps when determining what's appropriate for law enforcement to investigate and what should be handled by the school. This is especially important in situations when an attacker threatens their target indirectly. This may put the school and law enforcement in a gray area that is beyond what a school should handle, but not reaching a criminal act.
Some Ohio schools already utilizing threat assessment teams point out the law enforcement members of their teams are involved with every assessment right from the outset. In a moment, we'll hear again from Marlington School Superintendent Joe Knoll. But first, we hear from Delaware, Ohio Police Officer John Hartman.
My name is John Hartman. I'm a police officer with the City of Delaware Police Department. I am assigned to the Education Division as a school resource officer. So I work with the Delaware City School District. I'm also the Vice President for the Ohio School Resource Officer Association. In the Delaware City School District, I operate on the team. I basically am called for everything. And I usually say that our model is a little different than most. And the fact is that I'm called for any threat, either that or my counterpart that I work with as well. But one of us is always called. There's times where the SRO or the police might hear about it farther down. We are always in on the very initial step. And that just goes to show the relationship that the police department and the school district administrators have with each other. I mean, that's just something that it's a very much team approach. We don't withhold information as far as, when it comes in, they don't decide. It's immediate that we're brought into it. The role then is that we act as the liaison between anything that law enforcement or first responders might bring to the table for it. And that's why it's so important to have law enforcement involved from the beginning, is because you can always back it down, but as that information comes in, it's so important to not have that that break in communication. You want to be able to have that continuity in communication so that it can be quickly addressed and resolved as quickly as possible.
I have 2 school resource officers, 1 male, 1 female. They both live in my district and they both have kids that attend. So they are all in. And my SROs are on that threat assessment team, and I go to them right out of the gate. Just initially, they're part of that team. We don't wait. They're always involved in doing something. And what's really neat about that is they have a lot of connections already in the community. A lot of their kids play with the other kids, and they know parents already. And I don't know if every superintendent probably has this set up, but for me, it's just amazing because I get them involved from step 1. And they do what they got to do. If it's significant and a hardcore type issue, we do what we got to do with the law. But like I said, the bigger majority of our time is just trying to help problems, deal with issues that arise with our families.
Though law enforcement is included in the threat assessment team, it's still hoped that arrests or court involvement for a student who presents a threat should be regarded as a last resort. It creates potential for negative effects on the arrested student's long-term educational outcome. The University of Virginia's Dr. Cornell cites a study which found that an arrest doubles the probability of a high school student dropping out.
One additional benefit of threat assessment protocols being utilized in schools can be found in greater communication within law enforcement agencies. Law enforcement representative on the threat assessment team can help break down silos that separate, for example, school resource officers and patrol officers.
To explain how this is working in some Ohio communities, we go back to Stark County Sheriff Meyer and Hilliard Police Sergeant MURACO. Let's begin, though, with a school resource officer's perspective on this internal law enforcement communication from Hilliard School Resource Officer John Gleason.
I want to know, what the guys on third shift dealt with on Friday, Saturday night after the game, or when they're out, what kids did you, because 9 times out of 10, it comes back to, hey, Gleason, we dealt with some of your kids this weekend. And that's referred to as my kids. That's how, and I tell them this all the time. I have 1,732 children that I'm responsible for, that I care for. The kids at my high school know that, and they know that that is how I refer to them, and I tell them, my officers deal with you, they're going to come back to me, hey, we dealt with your kids, they're mine. But having that communication with the guys on patrol helps me know, okay, what went on this weekend, what went on at home, so I can go back and, even if it wasn't an incident where the kid was charged with anything, maybe they had, got into an argument with their parent, they took off and we had a missing persons report. Well, then I can go back and touch base with that kid later in the day, or when I get, back in front of them, what went on this weekend, tell me about, what caused you to do this, because this is outside what I consider to be normal for you. And that's building that relationship and rapport with the kids, which is what this is all about.
One of the things that we're able to do here is, our school resource officers communicate on a daily basis with our folks that are in the field. Now, you might say, well, weren't they doing that all along? Well, sure they were, but now we've made that a priority. And the priority is important because we're looking from a prevention lens as opposed to a response lens. And so if our folks that are working in the field go to a home that's got a trouble call, a crisis in the home, some type of crisis that they deal with, and there's students in that home that are going to be going back to school the next day, it's important for our school resource officers to understand that something happened there. And you might need to reach out to that student the next day, or you might need to make that contact, or you might need to communicate that to the administration that something's going on, and you might need to keep a closer eye on this from a prevention standpoint. By the same token, when the bell rings and we close the lights at the school and everybody goes home and it's the end of the day, there are still things happening in our community that involve the school and the school students each and every day. And so when there's something that happens in the school, it's important for the boots on the ground, those folks that are out there handling those calls each and every day, to understand, hey, there was an incident in school today. Someone had an incident that maybe they were disciplined, or something happened and created a crisis at home. And so we try to communicate that better than we have in the past. And I think it's really taken hold here in the county, where we're heading off problems by that little added effort in communicating.
So we have a specific detective that processes all juvenile charges to court. So that individual detective sees our patrol cases that go to court where a juvenile has been charged. They're also the same detective that reviews all of our children's services referrals. So they can kind of cross-see what might be happening in one area with an agency and then with another area with an agency. Then we might be reaching out to our school resource officers who might know this student a little better to find out, yeah, they have been on our radar too. So that is when we have decided as a community between the school district and the police department, let's come together at a table, let's talk about what we have going on and see what resource this student needs. Is it a criminal intervention to force them into a court system? Is it, no, let's get them resources because they have a mental health issue? The most important thing, I think, from a law enforcement aspect is that it cannot and should not always be focused on a criminal charge at the end of the investigation. It needs to be what is going on and how do we support that individual to be able to get them into adulthood safely.
Coming up next, Step 5, establish assessment procedures.